there are serious questions about conflicts of interest and whether portions of the stock market are operating well for retail investors. With his expertise in markets, Dave Lauer has been working tirelessly for much of the last decade to educate policymakers on market structure, including testifying numerous times before the Senate committees. Around the same time Dave was testifying in the Senate, Gary Gensler was implementing significant reforms pursuant to Dodd-Frank to protect the economy and the financial system from excesses in derivatives markets that played a part in the great financial crisis of 2008 and 2009. I had the privilege of getting to know both Dave and Chair Gensler during that time as staff director of the Senate Banking Committee's Security Subcommittee. And I can say unequivocally that we're joined by two of the smartest market experts and dedicated reformers in Washington today. Thank you all for joining us, and we're looking forward to a meaningful conversation. I'll now turn it over to Dave Lauer to kick off our Q&A with Chair Gensler.
Thanks, Milan. And actually, I'll just leave it to Alex, who can introduce we the investors and just talk quickly about what we've done here.
Last time we spoke, there were 70,000 engaged retail voices urging the SEC to listen to the issues that they were trying to bring to bear. Issues that had been brought to light over the past year and a half of remarkable market events. Since that time, our ranks have grown to over 100,000. Our numbers are just as engaged, and we are determined to stand by our principles and foster transparency, encourage retail control over their equities, and rebuild a level of trust and certainty in our financial markets that over the past year, 2 years, if not longer, from many people's perspectives has been lacking. So thank you for engaging with us directly. Not all of these questions will be pleasant, but hopefully they'll all be palatable. And it's really something that now we as individuals can give voice to our own interests as opposed to allowing legacy institutional interests pretend to represent us. So again, thank you for giving us the credibility and the acknowledgement that we have worked for, some for decades, some for years, and some for shorter. So with that, I will hand it over to Dave, and we can really get started.
Thanks, Alex. Much appreciated. And yeah, again, thanks for joining us. We'll jump right into it. We sourced these questions broadly from social media. We put tweets and Reddit posts out there. We had various communities very engaged, very excited and interested, and we tried to pick the questions that most people wanted to ask, and we tried our best to work through all that. So I thought it would be good to start this out. One of the main things we're here to talk about are the equity market structure reform proposals that came out this week. The most fundamental changes to markets in 17 years since regulation NMS was passed in 2005. I think before we get into the meat of those proposals, do you think that you can talk quickly about the rule process itself, right? These are rule proposals. A lot of people, they haven't been through this before. They don't know what the Administrative Procedures Act is. They don't know what this process looks like. So what kind of timeline do you hope to see to ultimately get to implementation and inaction of these rules?
Dave, Alex, and Milan, can I just step back one more step back and just thank you for engaging? You were a little bit too kind. Those of us at the Securities and Exchange Commission, 4,500 strong, we work for the American public. It's 330 million Americans we work for. And to hear from you directly is really important. And so I can't say that I've read everything that every one of those 100,000 people have written, but we try to stay abreast of it, and we try to stay up on it. And the proposals we put out this week, at their core, is trying to bring greater competition, what economists call efficiency, and fairness to our stock markets, our equity markets, if you wish. And it's really for you, the investing public. And so it's been informed in large measure by what we can discern and pick up from the voices that, of course, your members and that you represent. In terms of that process, if you could just say that, You might remember a movie, Schoolhouse Rock, and they in there they talk about how you make a law and how that goes through Congress. Well, this is actually a little bit more detailed, and one might say more specific, and you'd lose most people in ninth grade social studies class on it. But an agency like ours, the Securities and Exchange Commission, our regulator, has to comply with a 1940s law called the Administrative Procedures Act. And at its core, it's basically we can only do that which Congress has given us authority for. But then if we write a rule, again, it has to be what Congress gives us authority for. But if we write a rule, we have to put it out to the public through something called notice and comment. And it has to have economic analysis as well. And in the 1990s, Congress said that we had to look at everything in terms of, I love these words, efficiency, competition, and capital formation. And that's wonderful. And by the way, for our authorities in the 1970s, Congress put in our statute 20 different places around the national market system that we have to look at competition. So that Congress in the 70s, that Congress in the 90s was keen on competition, and that gives us a great deal of direction from Congress. But to you, I would say this, Dave, I mean, you look at the last 10 years or so at the Securities and Exchange Commission, when we put out proposals, generally it's another 12 to 18 months before the final adopting release. And you might say, oh, yeah. But
a lot of people will say that, yeah.
It's about taking those hundreds and thousands of comments in, considering that economic analysis. And mind you, and I know we'll get to it, there's going to be a lot of folks out there that are not enthusiastic about these proposals, and they'll weigh in. There'll be market participants that will send in sometimes 50 and 200-page documents that will read like legal briefs. They'll read like deep economic analysis. And we're obliged, as we should be, to consider every one of those comments and thoughtfully consider them. But back to you, Dave.
How long has this process been going on? So when did these rules start to get worked on under your purview?
Well, in fairness to my predecessor, some of this work was done before I got here, but I got here in April of 2021. You remember, and your listeners know, it was right in the aftermath of the GameStop events. The team right then, when I got here, was already working on a report on those events. We published that, I think, in September of 21. And so it's ever since that point in time. And in that point, there was 4, shall I call, conclusions or recommendations. And this is the third of the 4. Okay. But one was to take on and have more transparency and to look at short selling. And we put out a proposal on that, I think it was about 10 months ago, and still we're working on how to adopt that potentially. 2 was, if you remember, in the middle of all of that, people were shut out of the market at one point in time, many of them, and it was about the plumbing in the market called central clearing. Well, we put out a proposal about a year ago on shortening the settlement cycle, the plumbing, the back office, but important, really important.
You know, I can tell you that a lot of our community actually now knows what a settlement cycle is, and are very frustrated that we're still at T+2 and not at T+, let's say, real time or end of day.
I'm not legally allowed to prejudge where we'll end up and all these things, but I'm really encouraged by the support we have to shortening the settlement cycle to 1 day. I'm encouraged also about a lot of the support we have on bringing greater transparency to short selling. But as I said, this is kind of this third, and this is 4 different problems we're addressing, 4 different roles that we'll get into. But this is about the equity market structure itself, and we're still working on, and I'm really hopeful that in the new year we'll be able to put out some proposals about the inherent conflicts of interest that go into the predictive data analytics and and targeting certain users with one set of prompts versus other prompts. But
interesting. Okay, good. That's good to hear. So I'm going to, let's see, I'm going to bring up Jay Brown. And you there, Jay?
I'm there. I'm here.
All right. I'm going to.
hi, Jay.
All right.
How's it going, Jay McKinley?
Please, you can even call me Gary. Don't worry. Everybody else does.
I'm Jay Brown. First of all, I want to thank you for coming and starting and building this bridge to where you can really get to know the education level of these retail investors. But my question to you is, with this comprehensive load of proposals that you're trying to get accomplished, if you can surmise to me what exactly is most important that gets accomplished in these, what are some critical points that you're focusing on, and so that it can better have us understand what we need to be focusing on as well, because I think they sold a little short. We more than 100,000 strong. We got quite a few in this thing. So
No, I thank you, Jay. There's 4 proposals, each addressing a little bit different problem, but overall, a big chunk of the market is going to what we all kind of call the dark market. 42% just this past September, a recent number, and it's trying to get greater competition there in that market. Let me say something about retail, the public. When you or I send an order in on a brokerage app, that's a sweet order. That is a very sweet order. And the reason is it's rare that you have a lot of orders behind it. You know, most people, they're trading 10 shares, or even if they're trading 200 shares, but they're not trading 50,000 shares or 100,000 shares. And the reason it's sweet is because it's not likely to move the price of the stock. Right? That's just economics sort of. But so then how do we ensure that investing public, the retail public, the everyday investor gets a competitive price for that sweet order? And so that's a really important piece. I know that there's 4 different pieces to this. One that I think there's hopefully a lot of support is greater disclosure that you're introducing broker. And by the way, an introducing broker is the person that you hire, you know, that broker. Better disclosures, the execution quality. How well do they do for you? But probably the parts of it that are going to get a lot of, shall we say, feedback, and we've already heard in the last 2 days some feedback, is whether to move forward and have order by order competition. You put that market order in. We're all busy. We don't want to take the time to put what's called a limit order. We hit the button. We want to buy or sell, 10 shares or 100 shares of something. How do we get greater competition for that order? That sweet, individual everyday person's order. I hope that helps, Jay.
yeah, it does. It actually does. I think you touched upon a few things, but I hope to engage with you more, so further down the road, so we can really dig into it. We had a space yesterday. We went tick by tick what it was going to be. So
Yeah, I would say this, Jay. There's parts of the markets who are paying for the order flow from those brokerage apps, and when they're paying for that order flow, they're recognizing that these are attractive orders, and because they're attractive orders, they're paying for that order flow, but it doesn't mean that they're paying you the full competitive price.
Right.
And so we have economic analysis in that. That's called the order competition rule. You could call it the order auction rule. And we have economic analysis that say that there's probably $1.5 billion left on the table by the investing public. $1.5 billion a year might not sound like a lot, but that's a big number. And
It should sound like a lot, right?
competition role is trying to shift that $1.5 billion, or at least a significant part of it, to the investing public.
correct. Yeah. Okay. Well, I appreciate it, man. 'Cause we can talk payment for order flow for about 3 hours, but thanks for having me.
All right, thanks, Jay. So let me ask you, Gary. You know, and now that we're talking about payment for order flow, off exchange trading, you know, I would say most of our supporters, most We the Investor supporters, you know, found themselves, started their path into sort of the labyrinth of market structure when they found out 90% of their orders were being executed off exchange. And that in some cases, the names that they care about, they would see 60 to 80% of all volume in those names happening off exchange. So I'm curious, you know, first, to what extent do you believe that off exchange trading at that level actually suppresses the impact, the price impact on the market and impedes the price discovery process, both the level of off exchange trading and the concentration of power in such few firms off exchange?
Maybe even earlier, Sumerians were the hammer and code. And so recognizing that, Congress gave us a bunch of authorities in the 1970s to address that concentration. In the 1970s, it was concentration on the New York Stock Exchange, frankly. It was, you know, highly concentrated. We now have a very fragmented market where, as we say, you know, 40+% is being traded in the dark markets. And I think it's not a level playing field. And I think we go through this in these many hundreds of pages, that the dark markets has some particular advantages. And they're, as you mentioned, particularly concentrated. So there's generally about 6 wholesalers, but amongst those, there's 2 that have a large market share. Wouldn't it be better to have hundreds or thousands of pension funds and endowments and insurance companies competing for those sweet retail orders? And so that's at the core of what we're trying to do here. Again, each of the rules are addressing a different problem. One of the rules is also saying that the Securities and Exchange Commission, for the first time, will have its own best execution rule. Now, you could have knocked me over with a feather when I got here 18 months ago. I asked for a copy of our best execution rule because I had heard of it. I worked on Wall Street in my 20s and 30s, and I you know, there's a best execution rule, and I was told, no, it's actually not our rule. It's a self-regulatory organization called FINRA. And I thought, wait, this is too important. Shouldn't the official sector, we're representing 330 million people, shouldn't we have this rule? So that's one of the things we're also doing now, that when you send an order to that broker, and particularly an introducing broker, they retain that responsibility. They can't outsource their best X to somebody else. They've got to actually look at the market and execute in your best interest, or technically best execution.
So do you think the way that you've constructed, and we have, I think, a good question on the best X rule a little later, but do you think the way you've constructed the best X rule overcomes the way it's been described to me by FINRA personnel in the past, is that enforcing best X is like trying to nail Jell-O to a wall?
What do the words mean? Best execution. And for a small order of 50 shares, generally that means the best price within a market environment. It's a little different when it's 100,000 shares and you don't want to have, as you call it, price impact. You don't want to move that price. I do think, just to answer your earlier question, I do think that on particular names in our market, particular stocks in our market, especially those, as you said, that might be at 60 and 80% off market in the dark markets, that's not necessarily the best way to do, as you call it, price discovery.
Yeah,
so establish a price in a marketplace, in a lit marketplace, a competitive marketplace that brings more buyers, more sellers into the marketplace. We separately also said, you know what, there is a number of stocks, maybe hundreds of them, that they could benefit by trading at less than penny increments. And I know 1 penny sounds like just not that much, but
it adds up.
It adds up.
As any fan of Office Space knows, it adds up, right?
Yeah. And so, and that seems to have more support. I would envision there's going to be lots of comments on the details, but it does feel like there's some real support from what we call institutional investors, the hedge funds, the insurance companies, the endowments, to also lower that increment. But we're doing something else there. We're also trying to level the playing field and said, that in the dark market, they also will have the same increments to trade as on the exchange, so that they don't have some unfair advantage and give you 1/100th of a penny more and say that's price improvement.
Yeah, most people have never heard of trade size or tick size harmonization or realize how important it is, but it's weird that our current regulatory structure, was really set up to advantage the wholesalers over the lit market. And that obviously seems backwards to me.
I think, Dave, in fairness, and I want to say this to Dan Gray, when we first did this, what's called execution quality disclosure, Dan would probably say to you, he set it up with good intention, good reason to promote competition. But I think you're right. The effect has been over those 17 years that the wholesalers, which increasingly over those 17 years have grown.
Yeah.
So the market has gotten darker rather than lighter over those 17 years.
Yeah, I think maybe most people don't realize how significantly it's changed since Reg NMS was passed, and the composition of firms have changed.
That's quite right. But look, so much else has changed.
Sure.
I mean, I kind of kidded the other day about E-Trade Baby, but E-Trade Baby could be, old enough to be drinking beer now. And you wouldn't want to use a mobile phone from 2005 either. I mean, right? I mean, just, and by the way, if we are successful and do what we think best benefits the everyday investor in this, somebody should come along in the 2030s and say, we've now got to update it more, because there'll be a whole new technology in the 2030s using all sorts of forms of artificial intelligence or whatever.
So let me pin you down on just one question, which is part of what I asked. The price discovery process is both the spread, but it's also price impact. And do you think that by having such an inordinate amount of our orders, retail orders off exchange, do you think that impacts the price impact of retail traders? Are they not able to impact the NBBO in the same way as if their orders were routed to the lit market?
It's a very good question. It's a bit nuanced. Most individual traders, their orders don't have much price impact because they're, as we know, they can be fractional shares to a couple hundred. But if your question is retail orders combined, then of course they can have significant price impact. Yeah. And I think that when you have think about selling apples. Think about just selling apples in antiquity or all the way through early 20th century. You'd go into the center square of a village or a community, and you're going to get the best pricing for the apples. Right. It's the wholesale market, right? And the nature of the stock exchange is similar. The exchange has been for decades, centuries, like the central square of the village, the wholesale market. Now that can create problems too. They can get concentrated and anti-competitive as well. So one of the things we're doing is also lowering the fees that the exchanges can charge, something called the access fee, from 0.3 of a penny to 1/10 of a penny.
Yeah. But we'll get into that in a bit too.
To your question, I do think that those central competitive markets, economic literature would show you brings greater price discovery.
Yes. Okay, good. I agree. So I'm gonna bring Joel up here. Joel, another member of our community. Go ahead, Joel.
Hi, Joel. Joel's also maybe a guitar player.
Yes, definitely. Thank you for having me today, Gary. wanted to introduce myself real quick. I facilitate conversations on a near daily basis with a wide group of retail investors in the ape community and elsewhere. We all kind of come together and discuss issues of the day and try and teach each other what is going on in the markets. My question for you today is, a lot of our community, a lot of the people that support We the Investor, that also support market transparency, are highly skeptical of the SEC. And the more we've learned of market structure, the more we understand the rules and how the mechanisms have been put into place to favor big industry, the big financial players over the common retail investor, the more disenfranchised we become. What would you say to investors like myself about these new rules coming in and how we can expect that these are going to help boost our confidence in the SEC's role within the financial markets that we want to participate in, and that we have knowledge of how they operate now?
So three things. One, Joel, I understand your frustration and feel that frustration. Just on a personal note, I was on Wall Street for 18 years, and of course, I always felt I was doing that which was best for the clients, but it was also about the firm. Right? It's revenue and profit motivated in a firm. So there's conflicts. I understand those conflicts from 18 years of being on Wall Street, and that's our capitalist system. But in terms of the SEC and what we're trying to do here, and these are just proposals, is please weigh in. Please tell us. Go to sec.gov and not just weigh in on Twitter or on a Reddit channel, because that's not an official channel. Please come to our website, weigh in. Remember, we're going to get 50, 200-page letters that are really detailed on the other side saying, no, this isn't going to work. Or they'll go further. They'll say, we're going to be, filing these lawsuits against you if you finalize this because of this or that. So we really need to hear, the voice of your community and everyday investors. On the details, the third thing on the details, let me just give you a couple examples. This best execution rule, just for instance. Right now, it's at a self-regulatory organization. I could feel your frustration. I got here, I couldn't believe, you mean the official sector, the SEC doesn't even have one? Let's make sure we have it. And then I started to ask other questions. Does it apply to your brokerage app? And they said, well, actually, it's not your brokerage app. It applies. They can send it off to the executing broker, the wholesaler in the dark market. I said, is it actually order by order? And so we've leaned into that. And you all might look at it and say it doesn't go far enough. We need to hear that as well. I'm just giving that as an example. And then to this proposal, separate proposal, we say there's this segmented orders. Anybody who's trading smaller than a $200,000 trade, who trades fewer than 40 trades a day, and is a natural person, or I think we put in there if you have a trust for your family. But a segmented order, if that wholesaler isn't giving you mid-market or better, they've got to put it out to competition. Now you'll hear pushback on that. They'll say, we wholesalers are competing with other wholesalers. Well, there's
I
maybe
like the saying that these firms are often confusing their own competitive preferences for actual competition.
Right.
Yes, definitely.
But to Joel's question, if you like what we put in that order competition rule, and look at it closely, analyze it to the extent that you wish and feel capable, and write in and tell us, and that will really help us. But I understand your concerns. Look, I've been so privileged. I've served 3 presidents now. I left Wall Street in 1997. It was terrific. But I get 5 years in this job. That's my term goes through 2026. And I just hope that we do right by the American public and do best we can for everyday investors.
So let me drill into one thing, and I think what Joel's trying to get at, part of it is that, the current market structure is skewed towards one set of firms. And part of that is because when these rules were being developed, and this is not to impugn the intentions of anyone at the agency, but, the firms that were commenting and pushing and the experts were at those firms, right? And so do you think that retail's involvement and retail's immersion in this process is a differentiator? And does it help to change the narrative that those firms, the wholesalers, the PFOF brokers, represent retail?
Make choices, but I think it helps the five of us. I think it helps the broader community to hear that input outside of the five commissioners. It's just the broader community, not only of our whole country, but here in political Washington. I think it does help. I mean, I've already gotten, I think, some input from various members of Congress on this or that, one way or the other.
We've seen a couple, yeah.
Well, but the investing public weighs in and says, no, I think this aspect is good, and some aspects you might say are not good. I think in 2005 we didn't quite have that the same way. I think you're right, Dave. I mean, social media and we, the investors, and the Reddit. I mean, again, there wasn't a Reddit in 2005, so I think it is helpful, and I think it's already been helpful. I really do think it's been helpful in terms of what we took up, what we looked at over these last 18 months. And even after I gave a speech, I can't remember the month, but it was in the spring, I gave a speech. I said, I've asked staff to consider these 6 things.
Yeah.
And then we heard from a lot of people. And sometimes they were roughing us up, but that's okay. That's the democratic process, and that helps us.
All right. Thanks, Joel, for that.
Oh, thanks, Dave, and thank you, Gary.
And happy holidays, Joel.
You as well.
All right, I'm gonna pivot to something. This is a question I heard from a lot of people. It's somewhat related to the off-exchange trading space, so I feel like I can work it in. But in a recent interview about FTX, about crypto, you said market makers should not also have hedge funds, as they would be trading against their own clients. There are a lot of firms, a few firms, who have hedge funds, market-making units, and operate off-exchange execution venues. Don't you think that looks a lot like what FTX was doing? How do you feel about that kind of conflict of interest?
If you have an exchange where you're matching buyers and sellers and trying to get that best price, that exchange is not also a market maker. Mm-hmm. It's not trading in front of their customers, trading against their customers. So the New York Stock Exchange doesn't also have a market maker. Right. And there's a lot of improvements in our national market exchange system, and we've even proposed some, but that conflict's not allowed. You mentioned crypto, so I will just say it. The business model of what is called a crypto exchange, and I put air quotes, is far more than an exchange. It has something like the New York Stock Exchange or the London Stock Exchange, that buyers and sellers meet, but they are also making markets against their customers.
Right.
They are also often trading just speculative, which is more akin to the hedge fund. They're also doing custody and taking custody, and yet not properly segregating out. So the investing public, your members, take for granted that if their broker goes bankrupt, and some brokers do from time to time, if their broker goes bankrupt, that their securities are properly segregated and that they'll get their stocks back.
Right.
It might take a few weeks. It might take some time. There's even an insurance system behind that, put in place in the 1970s, Securities Insurance Protection Corp. You don't have that in crypto. You don't. Now,
Sure,
back
and
to what
I think
we
that fully integrated model, I think a lot of people agree and have seen how problematic it is, right? But there are parts of that you do find in our market structure.
Dave, I would say that's why it's so important for those of your members that are thinking about this, that those storefronts, I'll call them, those casinos that are offering crypto services to the public, properly disaggregate, come into compliance, address the conflicts, and properly register. All right, moving on from crypto.
Yeah.
To your question, do you want to ask it again, just so I?
Yeah, this idea that, off exchange, we have several firms who operate hedge funds, have market making units, and, they run these facilities that are matching, orders, that are providing executions. That combination.
AKA the wholesalers.
Correct. And that combination looks very similar to a piece of the FTX setup that you were critical of. And do you feel that criticism should apply to the regulated market as well?
Between and amongst these different, it's called market centers, but the wholesalers and the dark market versus the exchange, that they have the same minimum increments that they can trade at.
Right.
That they don't have just an advantage giving you 1/100 of a penny or 1/10 of a penny more when on exchange it's got a penny increment and the like. I think leveling that playing field is really important. In a separate rule, I think that this order auction, it says, all right, the wholesaler, if they're going to give you at least half the spread, mid-market or better, okay, all right. But if it's less than that, put it into competition.
Mm-hmm.
Put it into competition. And we put that out too as a proposal. I think having greater disclosure about execution quality, not only by those wholesalers, but by the what's called introducing broker, the brokerage app, helps as well, and making sure that that brokerage app retains that important best execution responsibility. Again, 4 different proposals,
right.
4 different pieces. But to your point, Dave, I think we're trying to address the same thing that you're mentioning.
Okay, so that's good to hear. I think a lot of people will be happy to hear that these rule proposals, one of the main overarching goals is to get more volume on exchange and reduce the concentration and power of some of these firms that are executing offers.
I would say it a little differently, maybe because the lawyers who trained me well. We're focused on what Congress has started as competition and burdens or barriers to competition.
Fair. Okay.
So,
yeah.
Full and fair competition. One of the debates that's gone back many decades is the competitions between venues, between the New York Stock Exchange and NASDAQ, that type of competition. Mm-hmm. Or is it competition at the order level?
Correct. Yeah.
And I think what you're seeing from this chair is, I think, in this highly fragmented venue market, we've got a lot of concentration around market makers, particularly for the retail marketable orders. And those retail marketable orders, as I earlier said, have a real sweetness to them.
Yeah, we used to call it the juicy flow.
Well, there you go, Dave. There you go.
All right, I'm going to bring up Platinum. Oh, how do I? Okay, from Reddit. So Platinum, go ahead.
Hi, Platinum. I like the decorations behind you.
You're muted. Here we go. Oh, I can't unmute you.
Got it.
There you are.
Sorry, we planned for a space call today, so I wasn't
No worries.
exactly ready for a video. But thank you for taking these questions. So I'm one of the many retail investors from Reddit who has been learning more about the market after what happened to GameStop in 2021. So things like payment for order flow, dark pool trading, and FTDs, they seem to work against retail's best interest, which has caused a lot of people to stop purchasing and holding with brokers altogether, and instead purchase and hold with a transfer agent. So my question from Superstonk is, why do you think we should allow payment for order flow to exist? How are rebates and payment for order flow compatible with best execution? And shouldn't the best execution rule address this specifically?
No, I think, Platinum, it's a really good question. Payment for order flow and as you said, rebates on the exchanges, both have, they raise inherent conflicts of interest. If somebody's paying for your order, are they actually then competing order by order? And then I've said this publicly, a number of other jurisdictions leaned in and said we maybe should ban them. We looked at it very closely and said the core of what we're trying to do is create greater competition for your order, Platinum. That when you send an order in, that it get hundreds or thousands of folks if they want to compete for it. And secondly, that we ensure that the broker, whomever you pick, has to have a lot of transparency about their execution quality, which they don't, now it's only execution quality of the market centers, but that the broker themselves have to give you execution quality, their statistics on a monthly basis, and they have to do best execution for you as well. And did I say that the wholesalers have to put it out to competition? So in essence, to really sort of get at the heart of the issue is that order that Platinum you send in, that it gets competition. But I would ask, weigh in, tell us what you think as you look through these, if you have the time and you have the inclination.
Okay, is the report you're talking about the 606 report to be able to compare them?
So it's, you know a lot actually. There are 606 reports, but what's we're doing is changing what's called the 605 reports. So the 605 reports, which were first put in place 22 years ago, say that the wholesalers, the stock exchange, and the dark pools have to do some execution quality reporting. 606, you're right, is about the brokers. We're now proposed that the brokers themselves have to do this so-called 605 report, execution quality, and that they have to do more information in that report, not just price improvement, but the price improvement has to be as a percentage of the spread. So if you have a 2-cent spread and they give you a tenth of a penny, well, what is that tenth of a penny versus the spread, or half the spread technically? We've even done something very simple, like says it has to be published in a summary form that regular folks can read it, because right now it literally, the 605 reports are a bunch of dashes and numbers that look like from the Matrix, the movie.
And the 606, both of them are impossible to read.
606 is good.
I don't know what my predecessors were thinking. God bless Dan Gray is still here who helped write these, and he's a wonderful man. He's really talented, wonderful public servant. But we're trying to address that as well.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks, Platinum.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we've got a little time, and I do need to ask 2 questions. It's going to be hard for you. Maybe the first one's an easy, quick answer. The second isn't, but in the interest of time, I'm going to ask for shorter answers, and then we can bring up the last person, Pink, to ask a question. But and these are not related to the current rule proposals, but I want to know: are you aware of the effort that is being, the sort of grassroots effort from Reddit, where people are trying to directly register their shares with the transfer agent?
I need to learn more about it, Dave. I've heard about it. What do you suggest? What are you recommending?
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely send some things over. It's and there's a website, actually, drsgme.org, that you might want to look at, which has some information on it. It's something, I think it's often surprising to retail investors, because I wasn't really familiar with direct registration or the transfer agent space at all. Especially being on the front office side most of my career. And so, it's something that I've learned a lot about as well. And from my perspective, it's a fascinating way for investors to have a direct relationship with the companies they're investing in and the issuers.
I would also say this, Dave, there is a way that's existed for decades. Our folks can get you the details. There's a way to actually file something with the Securities and Exchange Commission if there's a specific thing that you think or members think we should do outside of the 4 proposals, but to actually say, you should think about and consider this rule, whether it's about the transfer agents or otherwise. Yeah. It's a very technical area, transfer agent.
It is, yeah. And in fact, we're working on like a second petition right now, which is focused both on this idea of direct registration, some extra transparency ideas we have, and FTD reform. And one of the things that I'm curious about in terms of FTD reform is what you think about the European approach, which is a settlement discipline regime that would charge interest on fails or enforce mandatory buy-ins.
So, this is the second
This
question.
is the second question, yeah.
We have put out for proposal, I know it's related, it's not directly to your question, but we have put out to proposal greater transparency around short selling. And a lot of the fail to deliver has happened around short selling.
Yeah.
We've separately put out shortening this settlement cycle, the back office, shortening the settlement cycle. But not only are we saying that the settlement cycle goes from 2 days to 1 day, you do a trade on Monday, you wouldn't be moving your cash and securities on Wednesday, you'd be moving on Tuesday. But we also did something in that proposal that said the same day, on Monday, you had to confirm the trade. You had to actually do something called affirm the trade.
Okay.
There's a bunch of things that have to happen that same day. And so, though it probably wouldn't go to zero, I think that too would really put a better back office infrastructure and have fewer fails to deliver. Not only because we go from 2 days to 1 day, but also because a lot of things in that rule says same day. It actually says same day, comma, as soon as technologically practicable.
Well, for a lot of these firms, it's technologically practicable to do it pretty quickly, right?
Yeah, and on that, it was allocations, confirmations, and allocations. And again, we haven't finalized that, but I'm certainly glad to continue the conversations more at a later time on that.
Yeah, and that is an area that we do want to focus on next after, working on these new rule proposals, which are substantial. But, it also goes into the locate process and the problems with locates. And frankly, the exemption that some so-called market makers have from the locate requirement under Reg Show, and whether, they're abusing that exemption or not, which speaks to at least one enforcement case that your agency has brought this year.
Remember it.
Yeah. Okay, so now I'm gonna bring up Pink from the jungle, and for our last question.
Hello, Mr. Chairman. I'm Pink. I'm a retail investor and direct registration or DRS advocate. So I'm glad that you started that conversation and to hear that you're interested in learning more about what retail knows about DRS, because we've been working on it for over a year. So just wanted to stick that in there. I've also been involved in the Reddit investment community since before the GameStop buy button was, in my opinion, illegally removed. So I just want to say thank you again for giving the individual investors the opportunity to come to you and speak to ourselves.
Oh gosh, Pink, thank you for doing so.
So you I think this question is really just an opportunity to reiterate what you kind of covered already, which is what the most effective way is for retail to make these proposals happen. Whether it's showing support through our advocacy group, like We the Investors, comments on the proposals, or something else. You did mention that earlier, so resources on how to do that most easily would most definitely be shared far and wide.
Look, I think, Pink, there's 4 separate proposals. They address different problems. So absolutely weigh in at sec.gov, and a real comment is actually on, through our website into the rule. But think of them as 4 separate problems: the transparency, that what we were talking about earlier, 605 rule, best execution, disorder competition, and then fourthly, a lot of the important things about the trading and trying to level the playing field. But I would say the best that you can do is weigh in, whether it's one sentence of support or more details, because remember, there's going to be a lot of details coming from the large market participants, the wholesalers, the stock exchanges, the hedge funds, insurance companies, etc. There'll be, and the trade associations. And so I would say that is helpful to hear from people that are actually trying to engage in the market and have a better life, or just save for the next vacation.
Right. And what I kind of heard earlier was to go outside of the comfort zone of the social media and really speak out and come to the direct channels and really communicate directly on what the changes we want to see made.
I think so, because Pink, while this conversation here, I'll have to check. I think we'll probably need to even take this hour and put this in the record. This conversation, you know, will go into our administrative record. Dave asked me, what's the Administrative Procedures Act? It's really an important law that protects the public. It means an agency like ours needs to put things out to notice and comment, but then there's ways that you go to an agency's website and make the comment. If it's just in the Reddit or just in social media, that's not technically a comment. And for us to really take that in and say, no, we've got 1,400 people that have said, yeah, this is a good idea, and actually to think about different pieces of it, because there's a lot of details in here, and it might be that, Pink, you care about one piece of it and you think well about it, you've done your research and you tell us what you think, or there might be another piece, Pink, that you think is not good and you should tell us that too. But to sort of weigh in ways that we can learn from your experiences and your judgment.
So I'm curious along those lines. You know, we led a comment letter campaign on the 13F2 proposal, and we had over 2,000 comment letters filed, most of which, over 1,900, were sort of a form letter. And then another 150 that came in as individual comment letters. Is there a significant difference or distinction between the two, you know, when you see a lot of form letters come in versus when people take the time to write their own comments?
It's a great question. Both are taken seriously. I wouldn't want to weight them, but what's often very helpful is when there's a comment that digs into some part of a rule, even the economic analysis or the rule text. Usually, Pink and Dave, the first part is this preamble, then there's an economic analysis, and then there's the actual rule text. And to weigh in specifically on something that you have a judgment on. And again, it could be a judgment that we did it right, we did it wrong, we should change it, you know, that we learn from that experience. So I'd say, Dave, that's often the case. The things that then the staff in looking through it says, all right, oh, we didn't get this quite right, we should change this. Or maybe there's some commenters, you know, with their thick 50 or 200 page, you know, very heavily researched comment letter. And then on the other side, if it's just a one sentence, it doesn't engage where they're engaging. They're going to engage in the details. So both help, but you can see how they help in different ways.
Okay, yeah, makes sense. Awesome, thanks, Pink.
People's
advice. That's what the Administrative Procedures Act is, that we actually get comments and thoughts within the law and within the economics. Okay, so we've got about 5 minutes left, so that's a little time over. So I'm going to ask one question, and maybe we can get a little deeper in the weeds. I don't know if you know, I still have not yet gotten to the economic analysis part of the order competition rule, but I have been reading it. I'm a couple hundred pages, maybe 100 pages in or so. And so you went with this idea of a retail auction in order to provide competition, and a mandatory retail auction. And I find it surprising, as I stated directly to you, you know, you and I sort of both agree on this keep it simple principle, right? That simplicity leads to better outcomes and better rules.
The KISS principle.
Exactly. And to me, a trade at rule is a very simple one. And it's interesting the way, I know each rule stands up on its own, but at least two of them, there is some interplay in terms of tick size harmonization with the order competition rule. Is not quite a trade at, but it's got the flavors of it. But why go with this approach, this mandatory auction, rather than a trade at And if exchanges want to build auction facilities and there are good outcomes and great execution quality, the best execution rule would then help govern and direct flow into those auction facilities.
So again, you raise a good perspective, and we look forward to writing a comment in that
for
way.
sure.
So, let me say why I voted for what I voted for, because I'm allowed to do that.
Okay.
I think that there's a benefit to the retail investing public of segmented order flow. That there's these orders, the investing public's retail orders generally are marketable orders because we're all busy. Like, am I really going to think about a price?
Right.
And no, I'm just going to hit the button, buy or sell 10 or 200 shares of something. And they're very attractive orders. And so right now, 90+% or give or take of those marketable retail orders go to a small handful of wholesalers.
Off exchange, the dark markets.
Off exchange, dark pool. And where we came out, I think, was an appropriate sort of balance. If those in the dark market, wholesalers are able to give you at least half of the spread, mid-market or better. That's sort of like what similar
Which is
to your trade ad.
Right.
They're giving you half the market or better. Okay. But it's such an attractive order. If they're not doing that, get others in a 1/10 of a second to 3/10 of a second, and use time-tested sort of sealed auction approach. Again, we'll see what the public says. We'll see what folks come in with, and go from there.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to bring up back Alex and Milan. I'm going to put back up are we the investors banner? I know we all want to thank you for participating and for your direct interaction with the retail investors that make up our supporters and generally speaking on social media, who are very passionate, and we hope that we can do this again, certainly.
No, I want to thank Alex, Milan, Dave for being such a good host, Pig, Platinum, Jay, and
Joel. Yep.
Joel.
Almost got them all.
And I'm not taking notes, but I really want to thank you and engage. I don't know. I mean, we work for you. That's our constitutional and democratic system. You're our clients, 330 million strong, and it's we benefit from getting those comments, and we're not going to get everything right, but what we're really trying to do is drive greater, as I say, competition, efficiency. What does that mean? That means better pricing for you, and better fairness in this marketplace. And so I can't thank you enough. I hope everybody has a happy holiday and some time with family and friends as well.
Likewise. Yeah. Anything you guys wanted to say to end it? Yeah.
Thanks again for coming, and we hope to speak with you in the new year.
No,
yeah,
absolutely. And look, because we couldn't do audio, we did video. There you go.
It worked out pretty well. And
I guess like something's going on over there in that Twitter space, and they allowed us to do it this way.
It speaks both to the fragility and the strength of the movement, right? So,
absolutely. There's resiliency here. Come on.
That's for sure. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you again. And, for those on the space, I think we'll stick around. We'll jump back on the space and chat a bit about this. And, I'm sure folks will have a lot to say about what they think. And I look forward to hearing that too.
All right. Be well, everybody.
Thank you. You too. Take care. All right. Well, we made it work. Let me see. Well, we tried to get as many questions as we could.